In the previous couple of videos, we discussed how the costs of the firm looked like and where they came from. However, costs are just one element of the profit maximization. The other element is revenues. In turn, revenues come from the firm's demand constraint. But looking more closely at this demand, we can see that it's far from fixed. The firm can use certain characteristics of its demand to relax the constraint that it operates under. And one of these characteristics of the demand is called price elasticity of demand. Now, the price elasticity of demand may sound fancy, but what it really is something very simple. It is how consumers respond to a price change. Some consumers are very quick to abandon a certain brand when its price goes up. And as those consumers are responsive to changes in the price of the firm, we call their demand elastic. On the other hand, there are consumers who don't care about the price change at all. They will keep buying no matter what happens with the price of the product they're interested in. We call their demand inelastic. Between those very elastic and very inelastic responses to a price change lies a whole range of ways consumers respond to a price change. We measure this responsiveness with the concept of price elasticity of demand. So formally, the price elasticity of demand is the percentage change in demand for any good X in response to a 1 percentage point change in the price of the same good. Notice, however, that a typical demand curve is downward sloping, right? So this means when I lower the price, demand goes up and vice versa. And consequently, for a negative change in the price, we get a positive change in the quantity demanded. And for a positive change in the price, we get a negative change in the quantity demanded. That's why there is this little minus sign, not so little in this formula, showing up in front of the percentage changes. Whichever way you go, up and down the demand curve, one of these changes is going to be negative. And that's why we say the price elasticity of demand is always a negative number. Sometimes it can be confusing, as economists refer to an elastic demand when the price elasticity demand is greater than 1. What we mean by that is that for any percentage point change in the price, there is a greater than a percentage point change in the quantity demanded. And somehow the minus sign gets swept under the rug. But you guys should always remember that it's actually there. All right, so let's clear an additional confusion of introductory economics students. Many of you think that the slope of the demand curve is the same as its elasticity. After all, the slope of the demand curve represents how consumers respond to a change in the price, and the elasticity also represents how consumers respond to a change in price, right? Well, not quite. The slope of the demand function is the same along the entire demand function. We know that when we look at the absolute change of the price for each unit of change in the quantity demanded, the absolute numbers here are the key. Unlike the slope, however, the percentage change in the quantity demanded as a result of a certain percentage change in the price varies along the demand curve. For example, between point A and B, we get a relatively large change in the quantity demanded for a relatively small change in the price. So the consumers are very responsive in that segment of the demand curve, judging by the percentage points change in their demand. However, if you look at the change between points C and D, we will see that to make the consumers buy 20 more cars, the firm needs to lower its price drastically from $400 to around $2,500. So we can safely conclude that consumers are less responsive to price changes in the lower parts of the demand curve. This also tells you that elasticity is not identical, not the same, along the demand curve. Now, whereas demand is elastic in the upper parts of the demand curve and elasticity in absolute terms is greater than 1, we can have a very stubborn demand at lower prices. A demand which is not that responsive, not that elastic to changes in the price. So in the lower segments of the demand curve, demand is relatively inelastic. The reason elasticity is so interesting to analyze is that it has a direct effect on the pricing strategies of the firm. Firms can increase revenues by lowering their price in the elastic part of the demand curve. However, a completely different pricing strategy is valid when your demand is inelastic. To raise revenues in the inelastic segment of your demand curve, you need to raise, not lower, your prices. During the live lectures and the seminars this week, we'll expand on those issues in more detail. Note that your textbook also has a very nice treatment of the issues we've seen here. We'll continue the discussion, but now it's time to conclude the lessons from the weekly videos.